fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots to the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. That is an LNS, dude. Well, if there's like this thing, it's rotating.
Roger, there's troubleshooting team
Did you box moving target?
No, I took an auto track.
Oh, okay.
Oh my gosh, dude.
Wow, look at that, man. Look at it fly.
I have frequently been asked by a person of my background, a former chief of the defense staff, a former chairman of the NATO military committee, why I think there is a cover-up, or what the reasons may be for governments wishing to cover up the facts about UFOs. And a number of explanations have often been put forward, of which the most frequent and perhaps the most plausible is that the governments concerned, which are primarily that of the United States and that of my own country, believe that if they told the truth, which is that there are objects in our atmosphere which are technically miles in advance of anything that we can deploy, that we have no means of stopping them coming here, and that we have no defense against them should they be hostile, that, I believe, is because governments fear that if they did disclose those facts, people would panic. People would rush about, jam the switchboard like they did on that famous day in New York when there was a spoof, Martians have landed. People will go mad and they'll jump up and down. I don't believe that at all. I've said so in print. I've said it in the foreword I wrote to one of Timothy Good's books. I do not believe that people today, in the 21st century, are going to panic at that sort of information. After all, they have put up with the introduction of nuclear weapons, the destruction of 2 Japanese cities 50 years ago. They take as a matter of course that we can land vehicles on Mars. They can land to the precise instant forecast years before, vehicles on distant planets. Why should they panic? They're much more interested in this country in doing the pools or the lottery. They shrug their shoulders and take it as a matter of course. Anyway, they don't trust politicians, in my experience. So I believe that that is the most likely explanation. There are, of course, others, but I think I'll have to settle for that. We are being visited and have been visited for many years by people from outer space, from other civilizations, that it behoves us, in case some of these people in the future or now should turn hostile, to find out who they are, where they come from, and what they want. This should be the subject of rigorous scientific investigation.
This is from a counterintelligence Air Force officer who said, look, I have done UFO investigations. Of course you can't know his name. We are to attempt, I do it for OSI, he said. It requires strict evidence collection and retrieval techniques. We are to attempt to disprove sightings and events. We are to seize photos, spread disinformation, discredit eyewitnesses, remove and analyze any material, transport evidence to a central location, sign secrecy agreements with all witnesses threatening heavy fines, prison time, the end of their pension, and disgrace if they say a word to anybody. People say, how do you keep secrets? Not so hard. If it's a classified experimental aircraft, we use a contractor in odd disinformation positions to cover it up. But if it's what we call an other, we are debriefed, we turn in our clothing, and we place all evidence in special containers and burn bags, and the incident never happened. He has done that with as many as 180 people in the basement, some of them really frightened. One of them sent out a flash message because he could not believe the quote-unquote thing that showed up at their base one day. All right, so I'm not going to say any more about that.
Omaha, 50 kid, Rockhill Falls with past ability to launch helo ASAP. Yeah, we have 31 knots sustained top side.
What was splashed?
And there's still, by the way, a lot we really don't know. I think what's important is that we have identified some very, very interesting anomalous type of aircraft. Let's call them aircraft. Things that don't have any obvious flight surfaces, any obvious forms of propulsion, and maneuvering in ways that include extreme maneuverability beyond, I would submit, the healthy G-forces of a human or anything biological. Hypersonic velocities, low observability, positive lift, again, seemingly in defying the laws of aerodynamics. So people are talking.
So do you think? I mean, I know, but do you believe? When you get that Navy pilot saying what he said, do you think that that was, a UFO? To obviously, I don't have any other word to use, or that, or something else.
Sure, that's a great question. Keeping in mind, it's not just the pilot's testimony on an observation. Sure, when someone comes to you who's in charge of a multi-million-dollar weapon platform, who maintains a top secret security clearance, who is paid and trusted by this country to go fight wars and to fly over cities with live munitions, and by the way, they're trained observers with millions of dollars invested in their training.
Yep.
I would submit to you it's pretty compelling, but on top of that, it's not just the eyewitness testimony. It is actual electro-optical data and radar returns. It's also people like radar operators and air traffic controllers. So I will tell you unequivocally that through the observation, scientific methodologies that were applied to look at this phenomena, that these aircraft, we'll call them aircraft, are displaying characteristics that are not currently within the U.S. inventory, nor in any foreign inventory that we are aware of.
So I know you're being clear, but I mean, the answer is yes.
I can't speak on behalf of the government. Obviously, I'm not in the U.S. government anymore. My personal belief is that there is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone, whatever that means.
Maybe it's a good starting point to tell you how one of the things that I discovered very early on was a document in the CIA's own archives. It's the archives of America's top intelligence service, the CIA.
Yep.
And in that intelligence service, there is a document that records how a decision was made by the US Secret Service, the intelligence services, to ridicule and stigmatize UFOs. The media was to be manipulated, public opinion was to be manipulated, and essentially the whole idea was to try to discourage people from taking an interest in the subject. And as soon as I saw that document, I love nothing more than proof that somebody's trying to stop me from knowing something.
Yep.
And as soon as I saw that document, I thought, wow, this is for real.
Yep.
And the more I've dug, the more I've become convinced there is a genuine reality out there. And yes, might sound crazy, but there is a cover-up. I do think the United States government is holding on to information, and we're now at a really interesting time in history because the Congress, the US Parliament, if you like, they've passed laws, and they actually, much to the Defense Department of the United States' disgust, they've passed laws saying you don't get your money for your Defense Department unless and until you provide us with reports about what they call UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena.
Really?
And that means the Congress has now got to hold hearings, and they've got reports coming in from intelligence services and the Defense Department telling them to provide information, and they're disclosing what they're seeing. And what's really fascinating is there are a lot of pilots, US military pilots, and in a report that was tabled in the Congress, formally put on the floor of the Congress last year, on June the 25th last year, the world changed. It really did, mate. The world changed because for 70 years, the United States, Australia, Britain, and other major countries around the world, when people talk about UFOs, I've got mates, they say they've seen things in the sky, and everybody kind of laughs. They all go, oh, they think it's a joke. And we are all taught, we're all conditioned to treat it with ridicule. And the interesting thing is, as a result of that report being tendered in the Parliament of the Congress last year, the US reversed its claims. Because up until that point, they'd said UFOs, whatever they are, they're not a threat to national security, they're no threat to flight safety, and absolutely we can explain them. Most of the time they're weather balloons or anomalous weather or stars, satellites, misidentified aircraft. And it turns out that was complete BS. And in the report that was tendered to the Congress, they admitted they'd looked at 144 individual sightings by mainly US military pilots. And a lot of these sightings are still confidential. Many of them, they've got videos.
The people that are trying to hide things are the people who make the fakes. Because when you flood something with fakes, it discredits anything that is real. Like if there is 10 real videos out there, and I'm trying to hide that those real videos exist or discredit them, what I do is just go make 600 fakes, and then everyone goes, mate, it's full of fakes.
And that's called disinformation. And there are actually people in the intelligence services who actually do that. And so I've actually met people who've admitted that they've been involved in putting false information out into the community of people who take an interest in UFOs. They've deliberately put BS information out there to try to discredit the whole thing.
Yes.
But
some basic move.
Let me tell you a story. What I did was I wrote letters, good old-fashioned snail mail letters, and I put stamps on them and posted them. And I sent one off to Nat. And he lived in Baltimore, in the east coast of the USA. And I honestly didn't expect to get letters back. But all of a sudden one day my phone rang, and he was calling me on an encrypted app called Signal. So he knew he was calling me on a confidential protected communications system. And he went, is that Ross? And I went, yeah. And I went, oh heavens, is that Nat Kobitz? And this is a guy who did all the research and development for the US Navy for about 30 years.
No way.
He designed all their secret boats, and he even designed bits of spacecraft for the Apollo missions and things like that. Anyway, we got to know each other, and sadly he was dying. He was dying from cancer. And after we built up a bit of a friendship, after a month or so, he said, look, I know you're writing a book on UFOs. Why don't you ask me the question? And so I asked him the question. And what I asked him about was claims that there have been crash retrievals. That there have been recovered technology, that the US has recovered technology. And before I tell you what he told me, I'll tell you that the official position of the US government from the Obama White House when they responded to a petition asking for them to be transparent about this is denial. They have categorically denied that they are in possession of recovered technology. And there was a similar qualified denial to the Congress when they held a hearing, a public hearing, just last week into UFOs. Nat Kovitz, though, knowing he was about to die, and he died about 2 months after I interviewed him,
Yeah.
I said, Nat, are you aware, were you ever read into, were you ever briefed
Yeah.
about a crash retrieval program for UFOs, UAPs?
I'm getting goosebumps. Yeah, I'm getting goosebumps.
Oh, mate, I was.
Yeah.
I really was. And there's this pause.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, oh, he's going to get annoyed with me, you know,
Yeah.
because you know when
'Cause
you're
you're
asking
asking
a
a stupid question
yeah, it's
and
like
blah, blah, blah,
you know,
yeah.
I was almost embarrassed to ask
Yeah,
the question.
yeah.
And there's this really long pause, like you could hear a pin drop, and I can just hear the sizzle, the trans-Pacific sizzle on the static. And then he goes, yes,
No way.
but I was never read out of it, so there's not much I can tell you. There is always the risk that I'm being fed what's called disinformation.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That the US is trying to feed
part of it.
information to me as a credible journalist to try and put the Russians off or put the Chinese off from screwing with them. So there's always that possibility. But I think the reason why, the most plausible explanation for why this has been kept secret, is that the US has had this technology for many, many years, possibly since World War II.
Yeah.
And they've been trying to back engineer it. And there's only a few people in the military who actually know that the US military has possession of it. And in fact, it's hidden, I believe, in private aerospace, inside a private company.
Yeah.
Because that's the way you do it. You're trying to avoid the freedom of information laws. You're trying to avoid oversight by Congress. And it's very interesting because I always laughed when people talked to me about alien spacecraft, or even worse, alien bodies being recovered. I always thought, oh, this is crazy. But then the former head of the Pentagon program, Lou Elizondo, he's gone public.
Yeah.
He went on TV in America and he's spoken to me about it. He says that the US, he believes, has recovered technology that is not human.
Yeah.
I'll say that again.
Yeah.
The United States government has been accused by one of its own employees of hiding the fact that it has recovered alien technology.
No.
You're talking
If it hasn't-
1987. Let's go back to 1947 when all
Okay.
the noise began. Before we'd put up a satellite, before there was man in space. The government's primary concerns, according to the documents we've gotten, and I'll show a couple of these in just a second, were how do the darn things work? Imagine if you could duplicate the technology.
Sure.
They knew right off in 1947, a crash occurred outside Roswell, New Mexico, within 2 weeks of the big noise beginning about flying saucers. And a colleague and I have talked to 92 people in conjunction with that one event.
Okay.
We found Air Force generals, FBI agents, the pieces were found, bodies were found. An announcement was made that they had a crash saucer. Within 24 hours, they put in the fix to cover it
That's
up.
the famous thing. So what your contention is that ever since then there's been this long web of cover-up about
Yes.
that thing?
Now, you cover up not by telling everybody everything. The important thing, and this is where my background in classified work comes in, is compartmentalization, need to know. Just because you have a clearance doesn't mean you get access to the data. And they put special caveats, they're called top secret ultra, top secret umbra, top secret magic for UFO stuff. And to illustrate the problem, some people think that the Freedom of Information Act is a magic key that unlocks all the door. Let me give you an example. We went after the CIA, everybody's favorite target, of course. They released 900 pages of stuff with internal references indicating there were hundreds more documents that they hadn't released. They put out a list of 57 documents originating with other agencies, 18 from the super secret National Security Agency. Naturally, we went after those. They turned us down flat. We appealed, we go to court. They did a search. They find 160 documents. We want them. You can't have them. We asked that the judge be allowed, federal court judge, be allowed to see the documents to decide whether they were hiding behind national security improperly. They refused to give them to the judge. They provide him with a 21-page top secret affidavit for him to see in chambers. Our lawyer doesn't get to see it. He looks at that and he decides in their favor. We go after the 21-pager. We're unsuccessful at the Federal Court of Appeals. Meanwhile,
What do you think's on these 21
well,
pages?
we got it. Here it is. And the only trouble is, and this illustrates the problem, as you start going
We
through it,
have some of this to show? All right, there, yeah, go ahead.
as you start going through it, you pretty soon find,
This is looks like my my autobiography here.
yeah, I mean, you know, this is ridiculous. 80% of this document that we got under Freedom of Information is expurgated. So anybody who says there isn't a cover-up,
What do you think's in there? What's crossed out?
their justification, all their information about sources and methods and details of sightings at the NSA, which listens in on
But
conversations
why?
everywhere.
I still don't understand.
Okay, first you want to figure out how they work. You can't tell your friends without telling your enemies. You set up a secret project to figure out how they work, especially when you got a crash saucer. According to this recently released, leaked to us roll of film, here are prints made from the film, Xerox copies of that. This is 1952, a briefing for General Eisenhower. You notice it says top secret, magic, eyes only. High-class stuff. Everything we found indicates this is legitimate. They were concerned with panic in 52. They were concerned with technology as well. And they didn't know the motivation of the aliens. What do you tell the public? There are these guys coming here. They got technology we don't have, and we can't do anything about it. But we thought you might want to know so you can go panic off in the street.
It's really quite peculiar. If you watch the interviews of Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon, and even the interviews of Harry Reid, that it's inevitable that they will get to this point. Each and every one of them get to this point of saying, well, it could be Russian, it could be Chinese, but it may be something completely different. And then people will say, well, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And then they will say things like, well, we may not be alone. I mean, that's actually part of the script. We may not be alone. And so you say to yourself, what the heck does that mean? What does that mean? And then some people press them and say, are you talking about an extraterrestrial from some other star system? And then they'll say things like, well, there are billions and billions of stars, and it's inevitable that there's life somewhere else out in the universe. So we hear what it is they're saying, but they will never say it. They will never say, yes, I believe that there's a realistic probability that these vehicles are being staffed by people from another planetary system, from another star system. They won't say it because that's an extraordinary quotable quote. And if it's attributed to somebody who's the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, people will all start assuming that he knows that, and it's being concealed. I think one of the most important questions that we have to keep pressing on, all of us, is that who is in charge here? If it's not MJ12, if those documents are deemed by a lot of people not to be authentic, then what is the group that is analogous to MJ12? I mean, for anybody to keep on saying over and over again that nobody really knows, that nobody anywhere in the Defense Department has any coordinated understanding of what these vehicles are, where they come, nobody can believe that. I mean, I've always been willing to attribute a certain level of incompetence to any government organization because I've seen it so often, from police departments to defense departments to CIA to everybody else, but nothing on this scale. You don't have vehicles being monitored coming from 80,000 feet down to 50 feet above the water in less than 1 second. Estimated about 43,000 miles an hour, and then going underwater and traveling at 100, now 200 miles an hour or under the water. And all around our battleships and our aircraft and over nuclear facilities and turning off the nuclear missiles. And then nobody is figuring out who these people are. I mean, that's just not happening. So that this constant, oh, shucks, we just don't quite know what's going on, or everybody's in their own stovepipe and they aren't communicating with each other. That nobody with a political IQ above room temperature believes that, and so the thing we have to keep pressing for here is, who is in charge here? If secretaries of defense aren't being briefed in on this, if presidents of the United States are not being briefed in on this, if the heads of Senate intelligence committees are not being briefed on this, who is it that's briefed in on this? Who is it that's doing the briefing in on this? That exists somewhere. And that's the key to this thing. And what that does is it bleeds over into the entire question about our government. Who is it that is in charge of really pulling the strings behind the Democratic Party, Republican Party, the Senate and the House? Okay, who is it they're afraid of? Who is it that is knowledgeable about this? Who is it that are pulling the strings on this? Who is it that has the technology? Who is it that's garnered the technology? And there are people that are totally unbelievable who say, "Oh yeah, I know who it is," and they've got the whole secret space program, and I've been to other galaxies, several. None of that's true, in my opinion. But the fact of the matter is, somebody knows. And our job is, once this door is started to get open now, is for us to flood this door, bring in all the information that we know, give all the information to the American people, and try to generate a movement of people. And one of the things we need to do, very importantly, we have to participate in helping to communicate the spiritual dimension of this whole thing, or what is understood by the lay people as a spiritual dimension. We've got to get this across to people so that we can overcome this threat analysis, that everything has to be perceived as a threat against the interests of our nation state. We have to start perceiving ourselves as a planetary culture, a particular species that we are, and we have to develop our relationship with other extraterrestrial species. And that reflects upon all of our deep religious beliefs. And these are things that we have to come to grips with in the community. This is a unique moment in history. I know positively, based upon 50 years of experience with them, they do not intend to release any more of this information than they have already decided they want to release, for whatever their reasons are. Our job is to make more of that information available and to generate a nationwide, worldwide, planet-wide movement to insist upon our people being told about this, because we have to participate in this decision. These are sets of decisions that are being made now that are going to affect our relationship with these extraterrestrial beings for another 50,000 years in the future. This is an extraordinary time period in human history, and we have to tread carefully but consistently and persistently to get these answers to these questions right now, and not stand for these people hiding this stuff from us for their own perceived advantage.
It is no longer speculation that people see these unidentified flying objects. That's beyond question. Now, it's even become more transparent in recent months. And when I started this, we had occurrences, but I wanted to make sure that we were able to do something scientifically. Let's document who sees them, how many of them are real, how many of them are not. And we did that. We got a volume of research that was done, and I said, put it out to bid, and $22 million worth of research. And it was very interesting because it showed that not 2 people, 4 people, 6 people, 20 people, but hundreds and hundreds of people have seen these things, sometimes all at the same time. We've had some of our military installations in South Dakota, up that way, our missile defense system where they've come out, there they are up there, the people at the base. And since then, in recent months, we've had pilots who were originally, Sam, they were afraid to tell their superiors, hey, I was out there and I saw this, because they afraid it would hurt their promotions, which it would have done. But now, pilots have said, now they have an obligation to start reporting them. And the reason for that is some of the work that we did. And it's been good because they now have better, technologically, they can do better pictures of what they see. So I don't know what all these things are, but I do believe that we should take a look at them. Because as I've said before, you know that China's doing it. We know that Russia, which is led by someone who was head of the KGB, you know they're doing it. And so we better take a look at it too, because with what the pilots have said, the vehicles that they see, we do not have any type of ability to do what they do. You know, we have jet airplanes that go 750 miles an hour. These things, they estimate they go as much as 3,000 miles an hour. So I'm just, I think it's something we need to look at.
Nick Pope, what do you believe now that you didn't believe 5 years ago?
Well, I came into the job as a skeptic, but I was convinced by the sheer weight of evidence, the sightings, the radar evidence, all that sort of thing, that some of these things that we see in the sky and call UFOs are extraterrestrial in origin.
Extraterrestrial what? Craft with people inside them?
Well, craft of some sort, certainly. That's not to say they all are. Of course, most of them have conventional explanations, but after rigorous investigation, we find that 5 or 10% absolutely defy any conventional explanation, and these ones, yes, it does look as if they may be some sort of craft from elsewhere.
And what do you think is going on? What do you think these people and these craft are doing?
That's the difficult question. It's very difficult to say because although the evidence is convincing, it's often contradictory. Some people say that it bears the hallmarks of some sort of reconnaissance exercise. Certainly these sightings have been going on for many, many years. Lots of reliable witnesses, many military personnel citing them, but yet no open, outright contact. So that does tend to suggest that they are trying to keep themselves hidden.
What was it about your own role in the Ministry of Defence that made you more certain that this was going on? Was there anything there that you found out that gave rise to your conviction that these craft and these extraterrestrial people existed?
Well, yes, of course. Working in the Ministry of Defence, I had access to all sorts of inside data, and when I was conducting my investigations, I would liaise with Royal Air Force officers, I could impound radar tapes, I could go and speak to witnesses, I could speak to the Royal Observatory at Greenwich, I could make all sorts of checks to try and get to the bottom of these sightings. Checks which really civilian UFO researchers were not able to make.
But if you believed this, of these reports that were coming out from the people you talked to, why did nobody else come out and say the same thing? Why are you the only defence official who's come out saying this?
Well, I think it's all to do with people's personal prejudices. You've only got to mention the phrase UFO, and a lot of people just switch off. They think this is not an issue that they wish to be associated with. But certainly over the years, the evidence is undeniable. I suspect there are more people...
Is it, you see, Mr. Pope? Because, I mean, the Ministry of Defence gave us a statement tonight saying, as far as we know, no one has ever established any defence significance in any UFO sighting, which, of course, is a particular point the Ministry of Defence would make. But nor has anyone, they say, provided evidence to make us believe that any alien craft has ever penetrated British airspace.
Well, I think it's absolutely clear that structured craft of unknown origin have and continue to penetrate the UK air defence region. This has happened on a number of occasions. We've had radar evidence. On some occasions, we've had aircraft scrambled. And it seems to me that although we can't absolutely say what these things are, but given that they are penetrating our air defences, we have to say there's a potential threat until we can say that there is no threat.
The trouble is nobody else believes this inside the ministry except you, according to the ministry.
That's a difficult one.
Give us an example. I mean, give us an example. Take one example of some event which, with your inside knowledge, you can persuade us, really was an unidentified flying object, something from outer space.
In March of 1993, we had a case where numerous RAF personnel and police officers reported a craft over Britain. It was seen by the Guard Patrol at RAF RAF Cosford, then it was seen by the meteorological officer at RAF Shawbury. It was firing a beam of light down at the countryside. It was emitting a low hum. This was not some aircraft light seen from an unusual angle. This was a craft. It had got through our air defences, and that must be a matter of defence significance.
Why don't you go much further in your book, of course, than saying that you believe that these craft exist? You see, I believe there's a war going on, a one-sided war so secret we aren't even aware it's happening. If any of these incidents can be attributed to an alien presence, then that presence is carrying out crimes against humanity. What do you mean by that?
Well, certainly over the years there have been a number of cases of pilots who have been called upon to intercept UFOs. One of those was killed. That was in America in the late 40s. There was a pilot who disappeared after an encounter with a UFO that was recorded on air traffic control tapes. He closed on the craft. He said, this craft is right on top of me and it's not an aircraft. Then the plane crashed.
And very, very briefly, Do you think there's some kind of, I mean, you allude in many parts of your book to a sort of cover-up going on, the Ministry of Defence is hiding information?
Not in Britain. I think the problem's the opposite. We know too little.
We met two former Navy pilots, Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich and Commander Dave Fravor. In 2004, they witnessed something shocking, inexplicable, and seemingly out of this world. Did the thought of UFO enter your minds?
It was unidentified, and that's why it was so unsettling to us, because we weren't expecting it, because we couldn't classify it. But what I want to be really careful of here is that we don't jump to conclusions, right? That we don't sensationalize this or...
Little green men?
Yeah, little green men or extraterrestrial.
Yeah. You're seeing something that defies explanation.
Right.
Very much.
Yes.
It was November 2004, and the USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group was training about 100 miles southwest of San Diego. The advanced new radar on a nearby ship, the USS Princeton, had detected what operators called multiple anomalous aerial vehicles over the horizon, descending 80,000 feet in less than a second. Fravor and Dietrich, each with a weapons system officer in the back seat, were ordered to investigate and found an area of whitewater in an otherwise calm blue sea. It appeared to them that an object about the size of a 737 was just under the water.
So, as we're looking at this, her backseater says, "Hey, Skipper, do you?" And about that got out, I said, "Dude, do you see that thing down there?" And we saw this little white Tic Tac looking object, and it's just kind of moving above the whitewater area.
Do you ever drop your phone and it sort of bounces off the countertop and then bounces off something else, and it's sort of like no predictable movement, no predictable trajectory?
Yeah.
I guess. It was just
like a ping pong ball.
No acceleration.
Very, very random.
Acceleration.
As Dietrich circled above, Fravor went in for a closer look. So you're sort of spiraling down?
Yep. The Tic Tac still pointing north-south. It goes and just turns abruptly and starts mirroring me. So as I'm coming down, it starts coming up.
So it's mimicking your moves.
Yeah, it was aware we were there. You want to see how close I can get. So I go like this, and it's climbing still. And when it gets right in front of me, it just disappears.
Disappears?
Disappears. Like gone.
And you saw no visible propulsion,
Right.
no wings or anything to make it fly in our atmosphere?
No, actually, when it turned and started coming up, it was kind of like, okay, because we have nothing that goes that fast and just starts climbing at will.
Seconds later, the Princeton reacquired the target 60 miles away.
So in a matter of...
Like that?
Yeah, it just appeared there.
In seconds?
Yeah.
It was 60 miles away. Later, another flight crew encountered what they believed to be the same object and briefly locked onto it with a targeting camera before it zipped off again.
They didn't get a visual on it, but they did get this FLIR footage,
video.
the forward-looking infrared.
So you've got the infrared image
Right.
Yes.
and your eyesight
Yes.
and the Princeton
The radar.
all saying there is something out there.
Yes.
The Princeton had been tracking the anomalous objects for days. Dietrich says they were unarmed.
You know, I felt the vulnerability of not having anything to defend ourselves, to not having any rounds, anything on the rails. If this was, in fact, a hostile threat, and we were engaged, I felt vulnerable, and then I felt confused when it disappeared.
Dietrich says she briefed superiors about what they all saw. In no time, the story of their encounter spread quickly.
Rumors like that spread within seconds. I would say with less than 30 minutes, the entire ship knew this happened.
And what was the reception like?
I actually thought it was kind of funny and started
Yeah.
giving us a lot of grief.
Ridicule.
Yeah.
Ridicule.
Yeah.
Yeah. They made cartoons, and on the ship's TV, they played Men in Black and Independence Day and signs.
So
And,
they made fun of it.
Oh, yeah.
Did anybody take it seriously?
Yeah, I believe the Admiral staff made a few phone calls, but that was the extent of it.
Christopher Mellon served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence for Presidents Clinton and George W. Bush, and was on the staff of the Senate Intelligence Committee. He had access to top-secret government programs. He says what Dietrich and Fravor witnessed demonstrated technological capabilities beyond those of the U.S. military's most advanced aircraft.
In the case of the Nimitz, these vehicles seem to have unlimited loiter time, which we don't have. We're limited in terms of altitude. It's hard to design something that functions well at ground level that can go, to 60,000 or 80,000 feet.
And then drop.
And then drop down to the deck or drop to 20,000 feet, and and it's like a straight vertical line.
In seconds.
Yeah, in seconds.
And this has been captured on radar.
Yeah. I've talked to some of the radar operators who observe that. Then the acceleration is far beyond anything that we're capable of.
What's the fastest one of our jets can go?
Probably for a very brief period of time, 1,500 or 2,000 miles an hour. Nothing near the degree of acceleration that has been observed in some of these cases. There's nothing we could build that would be strong enough to endure that amount of force.
Good evening. We begin with shocking allegations that UFOs have interfered with missiles at U.S. Air Force bases, and aliens are monitoring nuclear warheads and bombs. Our first guests claim UFOs have activated missile systems at 5 Air Force bases in 5 different states. They also claim a cover-up, that the United States government is keeping the information secret. Former Air Force officers and an investigator are here with their stories. Here in Los Angeles is Robert Hastings. What's your explanation for UFOs at nuclear weapon sites?
I can simply say after 35 years of research that these incidents have taken place. There are hundreds of declassified documents which indicate that UFOs have demonstrated a distinct and ongoing interest in our nuclear weapon sites. I've also interviewed nearly 100 gentlemen who were involved in these incidents at various Air Force bases. This is very widespread. What you're seeing here this evening is the tip of the iceberg.
How do they cause a malfunction? What do they do to cause something to not work?
I think that's probably still an unknown. I know that Boeing engineers attempted to duplicate some of the malfunctions. They did succeed in doing that, but they still can't determine what initially caused them. Bob Salas could address that.
Bob, what happened at Maelstrom in 1967?
1967, I was on duty as a missile launch officer. I get calls from my guards upstairs. First, I get one call saying that they're seeing strange lights flying in the sky, and I didn't pay too much attention to that. About 5 minutes later, the main security guard, the flight security controller, calls down, says he's looking at a glowing red object, very large, hovering over the front gate. He wants to know what to do. I tell him to secure the facility. We hang up. I go to tell my commanders. So within seconds of that call, my missiles start shutting down. I recall losing all 10 of them.
You didn't see the object?
I didn't see the object because I was obliged to stay underground in the capsule.
By shutting down, we mean what?
By shutting down, what I mean is they were not launchable. They were in a no-go condition, disabled.
How long to restart them?
How long to restart? Well, I'm sure it took over a day, and maybe...
All right. Now, Bob Jamison, you were there too, right?
Yes, sir.
And you were in the Air Force?
Yes, I was in the Air Force.
Where were you when this was happening?
Okay, I was a targeting officer, missile targeting officer. I was at home relaxing, and I got a call from Job Control to tell them to come in. A missile had gone down. My job as a targeting officer was to bring him back up. And so I went into...
So you didn't see the incident, you just went to the missile?
I went to the incident. I went to the site.
Where is Maelstrom?
It's Great Falls, Montana, just outside of Great Falls, Montana.
What did you make of the story?
Well, I know that it's true. I went into Job Control after I got to the hangar. I was called in, went to the hangar, went to the Job Control, and I noticed they have a map of the whole complex with green lights where the missiles were good, but there's one small area with 10 red lights. I mean, those missiles were out.
Is it possible they just malfunctioned?
That doesn't happen. Very rarely does a missile malfunction, and I don't think any... Much more rare would be 2 at the same time, but never 10.
Now, Bob Jacobs, where were you? What were you filming, and where were you?
I was officer in charge of optical instrumentation at Vandenberg Air Force Base from 1963 to 66.
That's
our job
California?
was to photograph. That's California, so right there on the coast.
Right.
And our job was to photograph with high-speed instrumentation every missile launch from Vandenberg going down the test range. They wanted to find out if we could figure out a place to put a telescope where we could get a side view of the missile so that we could see all 3 stages of powered flight. So I went up to Big Sur, California, up on a U.S. Forest Service road on Anderson Peak, and I installed a telescopic sight up there. The Air Force flew in a huge catadioptric telescope from the Cape. It was built by Dr. Walter Manning at Boston University. They put the telescope up there, and with that thing, which had a focal length of 2,500 inches, we photographed an Atlas missile raising up out of the fog cover and flying down range. We got all 3 stages of powered flight, and as the dummy warhead and the package flew on down range, we were all celebrating the fact that we had seen the thing and accomplished the mission. When I got back to the base with the film the next day, I was called into the office of Major Florence J. Mansman, and there were 3 people in gray suits standing in there. There was a 16mm camera and a screen set up. Major Mansman said, "Lieutenant, sit down and watch this." And he turned down the lights, turned on the camera on the projector, and the film came on. And I recognized it as the film that we'd shot at Big Sur the previous day. Toward the end of the flight, I was looking at Major Mansman saying, "Pretty good stuff, huh, sir?" And suddenly he said, "Just watch this." And as I watched, the warhead, the dummy warhead, the chaff that was put out in front of it as the decoy to deflect the Russian anti-missile tracking radar. Everything was flying along, and suddenly, in the same direction this stuff was flying at about 8,000 miles an hour, an object came into the frame, shot a beam of light at the warhead, flew up to the top, shot another beam of light at the warhead, flew around the direction it was flying, shot another beam of light at the warhead, flew down, shot another beam of light at the warhead, and flew out the same way it came in.
Well, I don't understand. Why didn't you see this when you were shooting it?
Well, it was 600 to 800 miles away from us.
Oh, I got you. And they confiscated.
Well, first of all, Major Mansman said to me, "What was that? Were you guys screwing around up there?" I said, "No, sir." And he said, "Then tell me what that was." And I said, "We got a UFO." And he said, "Lieutenant, you are never to speak of this again. As far as you're concerned, this didn't happen."
The U.S. government does not obviously appreciate people such as myself and these gentlemen speaking out about this. What we're describing on an ongoing basis, decade after decade, at multiple Air Force bases, is disruption of our nuclear missiles.
I know that there have been events in the Soviet Union where they have interfered there. They've been seen in just any country you could name, and they do disable communications.
The problem with this field is that it's surrounded by so many crackpots and weirdos who make a joke about it, that those of us who take it seriously and think that something is definitely going on that needs to be scientifically investigated are laughed at. The technician here in the studio where I am, I said we were talking about UFOs tonight, and her face lit up and she got that kind of look, which is typical of what happens to us. I think that we need a real scientific committee to be put together to look into these things. I think Robert can talk to this too.
Absolutely.
Bob Salas, you agree?
Yeah, I would like to make a comment real quick. The Air Force has perpetrated a fraud, especially in our case. They claim in their statement about UFOs that no UFO incident has ever affected national security.
Right. See, it used to be that one person would see something in the sky and say, "Look, Martha, look, there's something up there." Now things have changed. Now we have multiple sightings by multiple modes. That is the gold standard for looking for these objects. Not just one person, but several people that are reputable. Not just radar, but visual sighting, infrared sensors, telescopic evidence. Now we have multiple sightings by multiple modes. And so the burden of proof has shifted. It used to be the burden of proof was on the people who believed in UFOs. They saw something, prove it. Now the burden of proof has shifted to the Pentagon, to the military. Now they have to prove that these aren't extraterrestrial. And so I think there's been a sea change in the last just several years. 50 years ago, there was a congressional hearing, and it was coming out of Project Blue Book. And there was a lot of laughter and a lot of jokes about little green men in outer space. 50 years ago, that's the way it was. Now, things have changed. Now people are looking at are they a threat militarily? What kinds of sensors do we have? What kind of metrics do we have? We now have, frame by frame, an analysis of these objects. These objects travel between Mach 5 and Mach 20. That's 20 times the speed of sound. These objects can zigzag, and we can measure the g-force inside this object. The g-forces are several hundred times the force of gravity. In other words, any living person's bones would be crushed by these objects, so they're probably drones of some sort. These objects can drop 70,000 feet in a few seconds. Think about that. It can drop a tremendous distance in just a few seconds, and they can go underwater. This is something that we didn't realize before, but yes, they can actually go underwater. And they also move without creating an exhaust or breaking the sound barrier. So these are things that we can now document frame by frame looking at these videotapes. Now, when I was first approached by Carolyn Corey, the producer of this film, A Tear in the Sky, I was skeptical. I said to myself, come on. I mean, 5 days? 5 days you're going to look for flying saucers in the sky? What happens if the aliens are camera shy and they don't show up in 5 days? So I was pleasantly surprised when they actually found something. They actually have photographic evidence of objects that can gyrate just the way the Pentagon has said. And so we now have a sea change. A center of gravity has changed with regards to looking at these objects. We no longer simply look at one individual seeing something in the sky. No, we demand hours of videotape, multiple sightings by multiple modes. That's the gold standard now. One option, of course, is that they're weather balloons or something that's an artifact of our space program. Maybe a piece of rocket that is plunging back into the Earth's atmosphere. That's one category. Another category is anomalous weather events. They happen, and they have to be looked at very carefully. But the last option is other. That is not just the Russians or the Chinese, because these objects apparently can gyrate faster than what the Chinese and the Russians can muster, but it opened the door to the possibility of other. They didn't specify what other was, but you can fill in the dots yourself. Now, one possibility for other is hypersonic drones. We see that in warfare now. The Russians, in the Battle of Ukraine, is actually using hypersonic drones to hit targets inside Ukraine. To be hypersonic, you have to go faster than Mach 5. Anything faster than 5 times the speed of sound is called hypersonic. And so the Russians are now fielding hypersonic drones in warfare. But you see, this is something just in the last few months. These sightings, they go back decades into the past, with objects executing these gyrations decades ago. And that's why you have to take them seriously. 2 years ago, the United States military admitted that it stopped working on these hypersonic drones. Why? They're unstable. They zigzag. And that's why the Russians have put a premium on this technology to evade our Star Wars program. The Russians wanted a rocket that can maneuver and therefore outwit a stationary Star Wars system designed to shoot down these drones.
Right.
So that's why the Russians have put a priority on this, and they've now fielding in warfare. We actually see them as a military weapon. 2 years ago, the United States military stopped its program. They're too unstable. They were not reliable, and it was not worth the amount of money to put into it because the military was invested in the Star Wars program, not the anti-Star Wars program. But because Vladimir Putin announced the hypersonic drones, then the United States military said, oops, nope, we have to get into the game too. So now the United States is also working on hypersonic drones as well as the Chinese. So the Chinese, the Russians, and the Americans are all working on these things. But you can see how primitive they are. We're talking about objects that defy the known laws of aerodynamics with a technology beyond what we have today. And so that's why people are scratching their heads. Whose are these things if they're not the Chinese, the Russians, or the United States? These objects create no sonic booms. When you exceed the sound barrier, you create a gigantic boom that is then shatters windows and can be heard miles around. These objects can effortlessly break the sound barrier and not create a sonic boom. And they don't create any exhaust. We don't see any exhaust trail from these objects. So either they're an optical illusion of some sort, or they have a set of laws of physics beyond what we can muster. Now, if they are an optical illusion, if an object were to move in front of your eyes, traveling at a very slow velocity, but you don't know how far they are away, you may think that object is very far away from you, traveling at enormous velocities. So a weather balloon drifting in front of your eyes can simulate an object traveling at hypersonic velocities if you think that weather balloon is far away from you. So how do you tell the difference? Well, you look at wind patterns. It turns out that many of these sightings, these objects defy the direction of the wind. If they are weather balloons that you confuse with a flying saucer, then they would be moving with the direction of the wind. But these objects do not do that. These objects can go against the direction of the wind. Not only that, but we have multiple sightings. If an object is very, very far away, if an object is close to you, but you think it's far away, then it's traveling at an enormous velocity while it's actually just drifting in front of your eyes. How do you tell the difference? By having multiple sensors: radar, infrared sensors, visual sighting. Then you can tell how far this object is away from you, and then you can say that, no, it's an optical illusion. Well, we do that now. We have multiple sightings of these objects. By radar, we know how the velocity, the distance. Each time it comes out to be real. And so that's why we're scratching our heads. Who has this capability? And the answer is, we don't know. Well, when I talk to my friends who are physicists like myself about these things, they sort of laugh, giggle, their eyes roll up to the heavens, and they say something very simple, that a rocket using conventional means would take 70,000 years to reach us from the nearest star. Therefore, these objects cannot exist. 70,000 years for a Saturn rocket traveling at 25,000 miles per hour to go from a nearest star to the planet Earth. That's why most scientists disregard these sightings, because they defy the laws of Einstein.
But isn't that kind of silly? Isn't that kind of like saying, you can't, you know how long it would take you to get a horse from Los Angeles to Sydney, Australia? Isn't that kind of like saying that?
Exactly. And that's why I say that assumes that these aliens or whatever are maybe 100 years more advanced than us. But open your mind to the possibility that they are 1,000 years more advanced than us. 1,000 years is nothing compared to the age of the universe.
Right.
The universe is about 13 billion plus years old. That's how the age of the universe. And so the age of a civilization, just a few thousand years ahead of us, that is just a blink of an eye to the universe itself. And once you go to higher energies, the laws of physics begin to break down. The laws of Einstein and the laws of the quantum theory break down at something called the Planck energy. Why is that important? That's what I do for a living. I work on something called string theory, which lives at the Planck energy. The Planck energy is 10 to the 19 billion electron volts. That is a quadrillion times more powerful than our most powerful atom smasher outside Geneva, Switzerland. Any civilization that can harness the Planck energy would be able to become masters of space and time. Space and time as we know it become unstable at the Planck energy, which is far beyond anything that we can muster here on the planet Earth. So we physicists theorize, how advanced do you have to be to access the Planck energy? Well, we rank them. The Kardashev scale says that there could be type 1, type 2, or type 3 civilizations. A type 1 civilization is maybe 100 years more advanced than us, to maybe 1,000 years, sort of like Buck Rogers or Flash Gordon. They control the weather. Volcanoes, earthquakes, anything planetary, they control. That's type 1. Then there's type 2. Type 2 is stellar. They harness the power of an entire star, like Star Trek. Star Trek would be a typical type 2 civilization where they manipulate entire stars. Then there's type 3. Type 3 is galactic. They roam the galactic space lanes. They play with black holes, like the Empire of the Star Wars series would be a typical Type 3 civilization. Then the next question is, what type do you have to be to harness the Planck energy? The energy at which space and time become unstable, where wormholes may develop, gateways through space and time, portals through empty space. You have to be Type 2 or most likely Type 3. Then the next question is, how long will it take before you become Type 3? Well, we are maybe 100 years away from being Type 1. We're maybe a few thousand years from being Type 2, and we're maybe 100,000 years from being Type 3. And 100,000 years is nothing on a galactic scale. The age of the universe is, as I said, over 13 billion years old. And so once a civilization reaches the Planck energy, that is a Type 3 civilization, space and time become your playground.
These videos and all these things have been out for now, 5 years? Most people don't even know about it, right? So as hyped as it's been and all over the newspapers that it's been and et cetera, even Tucker Carlson has talked about it many times on his news program. Joe Rogan has. A lot of people don't know about it. So I think people, if it's not affecting their day-to-day life, they're going on with their day-to-day life. So, but that said, I think it was an important sea change in the internal discussions going on in the government because, and the reason being that I think this is actually partly true with the maturation of human social technology. It was becoming so obvious that this stuff was showing up again and again and again around our ships. They just couldn't keep it quiet anymore. Right. And so it's like, we need to do something about it. And Lou Elizondo and Chris and others, to their great credit, found the right angle to talk about this. It says, well, okay, let's say it's not out there. Maybe it's the Russians, the Chinese, or somebody else. We should know about this because we damn sure know it's not us. So that to me is an important thing to finally be a little bit more open about the matter. But like I often say, I'm not looking for people to give me permission to do anything. I'm just going to do the analysis myself with what I have. Avi Loeb has taken the same approach. He said, I'm not going to wait for the government to give me telescopic information about technologies or things that might be even in our own solar system. I'm just going to collect it myself. And that's the right way to do it, right? Don't wait for somebody else to give it to you.
It's also possible to inspire a large number of people to do a wider spread data collection.
Yes.
I mean, you yourself can't do a large enough data collection that would, if you're talking about anomalous events.
Right. Right.
You should be collecting high resolution data about everything that's happening on Earth in terms of in terms of the kind of things that would indicate to you a strong signal that something weird happened here. And this is why, governments can be good at funding large scale efforts.
Yes.
I mean, NASA and so on, working with SpaceX, with Blue Origin, to fund capitalistic sort of fund company efforts to do huge moonshot projects.
Right.
And in the same way, do huge moonshot data collection efforts in terms of UFOs. I mean, it needs to be like 10x, like 1 or 2 orders of magnitude more funding to do this kind of thing. And I understand on the flip side of that, if you make it about what are the Russians, what are the Chinese doing, make it a question of geopolitics, it gets touchy because now you kind of taken away from the realm of science and
making it military.
Some of the greatest, this is what makes me, as an engineer, makes me truly sad that some of the greatest engineering work ever done is by Lockheed Martin, and we will never know about it.
Yeah, I agree. I wish it was different, but it's the world we live in. But related to that UAP task force announcement that you just said, the bill was passed in the Department of Defense that now formally establishes an office to collate that information and also to be transparent about it. Money is now set aside.
Are there other planets elsewhere that there is life? Now, I know what you've seen is what those Navy pilots saw in 2004, and there have been some 300 sightings since then. And I've talked to those pilots, and they know they saw something, and their radars locked onto it. And then all of a sudden it was here on the surface, and then it's there. And they don't know what it is, and we don't know what it is. We hope it's not an adversary here on Earth that has that kind of technology. But it's something. And so this is a mission that we're constantly looking. Who is out there? Who are we? How did we get here? How did we become as we are? How did we develop? How did we civilize? And are those same conditions out there in a universe that has billions of other suns in billions of other galaxies? It's so large, I can't conceive it. My personal opinion is that the universe is so big, and now there are even theories that there might be other universes. And if that's the case, who am I to say that planet Earth is the only location of a life form that is civilized and organized like ours? But I'll tell you what that makes me think. I better be a better steward of what we have, because we're messing it up. And we're messing it up just the way we're treating each other. And so I know what my mission is: to be a better steward of this planet and be a better citizen of planet Earth. But are there other planet Earths out there? I certainly think so, because the universe is so big.